The Pentagon released its new national defense strategy late Friday. Its top priority, the homeland and a surrounding sphere of influence. Joining us for insight is Brent Sadler, Senior Research Fellow for Naval Warfare at the Heritage Foundation. Great to have you with us this morning, Brent. This is quite a pivot from some recent strategies, but perhaps not a surprise for this administration. Your initial response?
Well, the timing is interesting on a late Friday before a major snowstorm, but it also follows the State Department's similar strategy and, of course, in December, the national security strategy. So you got to look at it in all that context. But top line, nothing really is surprising in this, and it follows what clearly the president's been executing the last 12 months or so.
All right, let's take a broad look here. Will it make the world a safer place, in your opinion? You know, we've got European allies, for example, getting worried about both dominance and withdrawal of U.S. military presence in various areas, Ukraine, Greenland, to name a couple. So how do you see this national strategy impacting the world broadly?
Well, I mean, the document is really just a piece of paper. It's how those allies and partners and our adversaries respond to it. But quite frankly, they were already responding to actions that President Trump's been taking, and very clearly, and this has been repeated from the national security strategy as well as this document, that President Trump is seeking and exercising a peace through strength with military force backing up diplomacy that matters. And so we're seeing that from Iran. Certainly Maduro in Venezuela learned that lesson. And hopefully the Chinese leadership in Beijing are taking note and perhaps ratcheting back some of their more aggressive and adventurous military designs in East Asia.
Yeah, let's look further into China. Under former President Biden, the Pentagon described countries like China and Russia as the central challenge to U.S. security in these kinds of documents. How would you describe this administration's approach?
Well, it's interesting. There's been a lot of debate in subject matter experts that have looked at the national defense strategy and are seeing what they perceive to be a softening on China. I'm not so sure that's the correct take. There might have been some political or diplomatic moderating of some of the language, because inside this national defense strategy, despite what President Trump did in his first term, where it was viewed as meaningless and a dead end in military-to-military engagements with China, there's a clear articulation of an intent to expand those. So some are saying that that is perhaps opening the door to a softer approach. I think it's probably more informed by the potential summit coming up in April with Xi Jinping and President Trump in Beijing. But clearly, taking the China threat seriously is still very much in the rest of the document. Very sharp language in the national security strategy, which is a lot closer to President Trump.
Looking further into what's happening in China, we've seen more and more reports of what looks to be a shakeup in the top brass of the Chinese Communist Party. Those two recent men being investigated, as we reported earlier in the show, as well as, of course, the suffering economy there that's been going on for years. But more recently, a new report coming out about the decimated population there. Do you think these things have impacted the Pentagon's assessment of China's threat at all?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, it was very disappointing. Also released at the height of the winter holidays, you had the Pentagon's annual China report. Was largely kind of forgotten because of the timing of it. But what was most disappointing is many of the very significant events that occurred in 2025, military exercises, provocations, bilateral military diplomatic overtures to the Chinese Communist Party were not mentioned. So it's hard to get a gauge as to what exactly the assessment is. But very clearly, China remains on track for making sure it has a military able to wage and win a war over the fate of Taiwan in 2027. And there certainly isn't no backing down on that assessment clearly in any of these documents.
Okay, so another aspect of this document is arms manufacturing being highlighted and articulating a kind of pivot there. If there's anything significant that you see in that aspect and anything that you'd like to see more of or you think maybe isn't highlighted enough in this document?
So not a surprise, but a little too little, a lot late, unfortunately. I mean, a lot of the things that you were commenting on in your last question in China is effectively hardening the Chinese population for what could be a very long war and to harden their economy to the natural stresses of shifting from a peacetime to a wartime economy. And the Chinese Communist Party has been very assiduous in preparing for that and laying all of the groundwork to wage a long war. The United States may have only taken the first step of a recovering alcoholic and acknowledging we got a problem, sadly, but we have a long way to go. And it's nice to see it in the document. It'd be better to see it in real terms in shipyards and munition factories.
Do we have signs that that is a pivot that's taking place at a fast enough pace?
There's been some movements. I would credit mostly the surprise to many that we couldn't produce enough 155 artillery rounds during Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but it's still not enough. There's an acknowledgement that we need to produce more of the air and missile defense weapons like the Standard Missile-3 that was used to great effect last year to defend Israel against Iranian ballistic missiles. The production rate of that is still far too slow, and the amount of activity by the industrial base is just not really grappling with the scale of the problem. It needs to be a national emergency, and it's nice to see similar language to that effect in the National Defense Strategy. But again, that is just a document. We need to see money, and we need to see ground being broken on new factories.
And we'll be watching that closely for any developments. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Brent Sadler.
Thank you.